Hello, my name is Rebecca Harmon. I'm a translator specializing in art and cultural heritage. Today I'm going to introduce the evolution of a surcoat worn over armor called a jinbaori, with a bonus look at two of the surcoats that appear in the FX Productions hit television series Shōgun. So to get started, I want to show you a picture of an actual surcoat so you have an idea of what the garment looks like. Then dig into the garment's origins in the 14 and 1500s. After that, we'll look at the character Yabushige's surcoat from the show Shōgun, followed by a quick overview of how the surcoat evolves in later centuries. Then we'll take a look at the character Toranaga's surcoat from the same show Shōgun, and then the actual surcoat of Japan's last real shogun. So I wanted to show you this piece first to give you an idea of what the garment looks like. It's typically sleeveless like this, not always, sometimes it has sleeves, but because it was worn over armor, it had to be something you could put on over armor. This particular one I'm showing you is from the 1800s, which is a little later than the show Shōgun, which takes place in the year 1600. But it uses yak hair, which was also reportedly used in a surcoat owned by the prominent military commander Uesugi Kenshin, who lived in the 1500s. Although in his case it was white, the yak hair was not dyed. Um, I also really like this surcoat because it was apparently labeled bear fur, and I assume by someone who had never seen an Asian black bear, but the Tokyo National Museum confirms it's actually yak fur that's been dyed black. But it's still an interesting piece, so I wanted to show it to you. Next, I want to talk about the surcoat's origins. So it really started to become a part of military attire in the 14 and 1500s, and the reason for this is that armor changed. And armor changed because warfare changed. Prior to this period in Japanese history, people are fighting with swords and bows and arrows, typically in smaller skirmishes. But now they start to have battles with mass troops fighting in close quarters. The main weapons become muskets, which have been introduced from Europe, and spears. So you want something that protects every part of your body, and you end up with this sort of component-based armor where you can see that every part of the body is covered with its own piece down to the greaves on the shins. And they're actually like tied on to the to the body part they're covering. So in earlier forms of armor, you could actually see the garments worn under them, like a garment called the yoroi hitatare, which was a silk robe, often very colorful with designs woven in it. And it served as a sort of status symbol for the general wearing it, but now in this period it can no longer be seen because it would have been covered up. So the surcoat really starts to rise to prominence as a piece that you can show off your individuality with and sort of announce your presence on the battlefield, together with these very eye-catching armor designs like this one. I think he's a bear, but you also see ones where they look like they have rabbit ears. And there's another really famous one that was owned by Toyotomi Hideyoshi that has, almost peacock feathers or some kind of spikes protruding from it. And they have a sort of version of it in the show Shogun as well. But I'll do another video on armor later today. I just want to focus on the surcoat. But you can see in this way the armor and surcoat combination came to be used as beacons of a samurai general's arrival on the battlefield. In the 1500s, there isn't a standardized design for the surcoat. They tend to be made of warm, durable materials like wool and cotton for those who can afford them, but they're extremely expensive imports during this time period. But also traditional fabrics like silk, reimi, which is made from bast fiber, similar to linen in texture, and even paper. This one from the Metropolitan Museum of Art incorporates elements from European garments, like I like these frilled shoulder openings. The top vest part is wool, and the pleated skirt-like section is silk. I also wanted to be sure to show you one made of handmade paper like this one at the Tokyo National Museum, which was, the paper is treated to make it water resistant and more durable. So now that we have an idea of this garment in the 1500s, and what they kind of looked like, I want to look at the show Shōgun, which again takes place in the year 1600. And I really like this surcoat worn by the character Yabushige when he first makes his on-screen debut, maybe the first or second episode, I can't quite remember, but he's got this incredible surcoat with feathers on it and pleats underneath the feathered part. And the use of feathers is very period accurate. There are several pieces from this time period that used feathers. But the costume designer Carlos Rosario said in an interview that he used black swan feathers. And I'm not sure what the basis was for that decision because the black swan is endemic to Australia. And as far as I know, Australia was not engaged in international trade in the year 1600. Um, so I don't think that's accurate, but the design of the garment is very accurate. And also for Rosario's costumes in this show, they're just amazing and beautiful, and I can't say enough good things about them. Sometimes when I'm watching the show, I can't even pay attention to the story because I'm so distracted by the colors and textures and these just very beautiful forms that he's created. So now let's look at a real example from that time period from the Tokyo National Museum, which this one is from the 1500s. And it doesn't look as good as Yabushige's, but it's also 400 years old, so I think we have to make some allowances for that. You can see it's got some kind of black feather on it. The curator didn't seem to be sure what kind. They just said kuro torike, which means black plumage, so I'm not sure what type of bird. But it also has the pleats that you saw in the Shogun surcoat. And we know feathers were used in this time period extensively. There's a pretty famous surcoat that was gifted by Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first Tokugawa shogun, who founded the Tokugawa shogunate and who Toranaga's character in Shogun is based on. We know he gifted such a surcoat to his military general that's just covered in peacock feathers. I can't use an image here because it's not available for usage, but I also read about a case of swan feathers, which were actually white swan feathers. So, just from the historical basis, I think it's fair to say that if Yabushige's character had had access to black swan feathers, he definitely would have stuck them on his surcoat because it looks so cool. Next, I want to talk about how the surcoat changes over time. This is a very tumultuous period in Japanese history. It's called the Sengoku period or Warring States period, and that's when the Shogun takes place. It's sort of right at the end of this period when the first Tokugawa shogun is rising to power. And he unifies Japan and is proclaimed shogun by the emperor in 1603. Spoiler alert. And from that point onward, Japan becomes a much more peaceful place. There's still some fighting, but it's really not as much as it was. But it also becomes a very hierarchical society. They have what are called sumptuary laws, which means that the government is regulating what you can wear and what you can display in your house because they want this rigid social hierarchy to be visible in people's everyday lives. So samurai continue wearing military attire even though they aren't actually fighting. And as a result, the surcoat gets standardized during this period in a way that is not really true to its origins and does not really reflect what it looked like in the 1500s. So in the 1500s, they didn't even have the word jinbaori, and like I showed you earlier, it wasn't really standardized that much in terms of form. It was really made for roughing it outdoors. It was supposed to be very practical for horseback riding, wearing in battle. It's got cords to tie it shut. Samurai also adopted buttons from European attire so that they could secure the garment more and make sure it wouldn't slip when they were fighting and get in the way or that kind of thing. And they're made of really strong materials that hold in heat and keep out water. But then in the Edo period, when they're just kind of wearing it as a status symbol, they get very decorative. And I love this one that I found at the Tokyo National Museum. It's made of silk gauze. So if you look at where the bottom hem sort of overlaps, it's a little bit translucent and it's got this lovely gradation on it. And you can see the lapels are fastened open. I mean, it doesn't look like it's meant to be closed. I really like this garment. I can imagine wearing it maybe to a picnic in summer, but I definitely wouldn't want to wear it if I was sleeping outdoors in winter. So we can see how it became much more of a status symbol than an actual piece of military attire in this period. So in the show Shogun, you see Toranaga, who I mentioned, his historical counterpart is Tokugawa Ieyasu. His surcoat actually looks more like the standardized version. There are some examples, it seems, that existed in the 1600s, so I wouldn't say it's totally out there. But the Tokugawa Museum actually has three examples of surcoats that were actually owned by Tokugawa Ieyasu, and they don't look anything like this. They look much more like the designs I showed you earlier. They've got cords and are clearly meant to be worn in action and outdoors, but they're made of extravagant materials, time period appropriate ones, but like velvet, and the other one is velvet and two are wool. Um, but for this surcoat, it's still a Japanese-based design. And I think it's a lot better than Hollywood usually does, and it's very beautiful, and I love it in the show, so I'm not going to criticize it. And finally, I want to also look at this surcoat in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that was owned by the last Tokugawa shogun. Um, he sort of cedes power in 1867, but then kind of gets caught up in this little tiff and has the sort of last stand in 1868. And the curator speculates that perhaps this was worn in his battle in 1868. But again, it's a standardized design. It's made of silk, cotton, and has gold and silver thread, maybe stenciled gold leaf or stenciled silver leaf. I can't tell from the image. But it is 1868, so maybe he's not roughing it outdoors in the same way that people were in the 1500s. So maybe he wore it in battle, yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, that's it for the evolution of the surcoat. Thank you so much for joining me. And please join me next time. I'm going to talk about Korean artifacts in Japanese burial mounds, which may sounds a little bit boring. I promise you, it's not boring. It's really fascinating. And I contacted the National Museum of Korea to ask if I could use some of their photos. It wasn't really clear on their website. And they said, yeah, sure, we want you to use them. So I'm very excited. I think it's going to be a really good chance to look at archaeology and Korean artifacts, and I hope you'll join me. Also, feel free to write a comment if there's a topic in Japanese art that you want to know more about, and I'll try to make a video on it later. Okay, see you next time.